I'm Christopher Hale, and I approve this message. To the bullies, I will stand up to you. To the downtrodden, I will defend you. To the Democrats, I will unite you. To the Republicans, I will persuade you. To young and new voters, I will fight for you. To Scott Desjardins, I will defeat you. And to every Tennessean, I'll fight like hell in the United States Congress to make life better for you and your family. I'm asking for your support.
Good evening, everyone. It's Christopher Hale here in Murfreesboro and Rutherford County. I'm honored to be here tonight to talk about the politics of whiskey. We're here with the manager distiller of Cascade Hollow in Tullahoma, but also a resident of Bedford County, a constituent of ours, Nicole Austin. Vinepair, which is a magazine on drink and beverages, calls Nicole Austin one of the biggest badasses in the industry of whiskey here in America. Nicole is originally from New York State, but she moved to Tennessee in 2018 and works now with George Dickel Distillery. In 2019, she actually made the drink of the year, I believe, the whiskey of the year. So we're honored to have her here tonight. Some people might ask, you're a Christian, you're a Catholic, you're running in rural Tennessee. Why are you running on weed and whiskey? Well, we should be one of the biggest components of our economic growth, and that's what we talked about Jason Pickle and May, and whiskey already is. It's one of the biggest employers and economic boosters to the 4th Congressional District, and it's something that's really important to our community. So I've made the promise that I will be the most pro-whiskey congressman that God ever made, and Nicole and I tonight, I want to talk a little bit about how I can do that. Before we get started, I just want to give a little quick update on where we are and where we're going. 4 days. In 4 days, the primary for the United States Congress is upon us. I am a candidate in the Democratic primary, and I'm humbly asking for your vote. I've gone across this community over the past few years, particularly the past few weeks and months, listening to you and your stories, learning from you, learning how I can best fight for you and your family and the United States Congress. It's been 2,552 days since my opponent, Congressman Desjardins, held an in-person town hall forum. At that forum, he told an 11-year-old girl that he would gladly deport her father. 7 years later, he hasn't hosted a forum since. My last forum was yesterday in Grundy County. My next forum is going to be on Friday in Smyrna. And on Sunday, we will also have another forum down in Marshall County in Lewisburg. So I show up. My opponent does not. But we're not going to talk about that right now. We're going to talk about whiskey. We're going to talk to Nicole Austin. And Nicole, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Nicole, before we get started, I want to talk to you a little bit. So you and I have a unique story in this way. So I moved back to Tennessee in my late 20s. As a child, I grew up here. So I'm a Tennessean by birth and by choice. You're a Tennessean by choice. You grew up in upstate New York, and then you went to college in Manhattan and lived in Brooklyn for a decade and got into the whiskey industry, and then moved overseas to Ireland and came to Tennessee. So before we get into your narrative, tell me a little bit, so Alexis de Tocqueville, the famous French author, wrote a book about democracy in America, and there's a purview about seeing America from a French perspective. Give me the perspective of Tennessee, of rural Tennessee, from a New York perspective.
It's beautiful. I love the landscape. I love living here. And for me, even in New York, because I've been in the whiskey industry for 10 years, moving to this part of the world that has such a long heritage. The site that I'm distilling on today has 150-year history. And that's just something that's really unique and really special. So I'm really great to be here.
And Nicole, tell me a little bit. So some critics of Chris Hale, there's a few out there, not some most popular, but with everyone. Some critics say that it's absurd that I'm focusing on whiskey. Can you defend me for a second? Why is whiskey so important to this community, to rural Tennessee?
And I mean, whiskey it's such a critical value-added agricultural product. Whiskey, a lot of people don't know, and this is something that even I didn't know, 15 years ago. Whiskey is made from grain, right? It's a distilled spirit made from grain. And a lot of that grain is grown right here in Tennessee that we use to make our whiskey with. And that's incredibly valuable for farmers, right? So if you support local agriculture, you certainly do support value-added agricultural products like beer and whiskey. And we also, when we're all done with that grain, we kind of take the starches, convert them to sugar and alcohol, but those proteins and heavier elements that are left over are what we call spent grain. And we give that for free to local farmers who, feed that to cattle. It's really valuable to them. So really, that local agriculture benefits immensely from having distilleries present. And of course, tourism as well. I think something that a lot of people don't know is that the Tennessee Whiskey Trail actually gets more visitors every year than the kind of more famous Kentucky Bourbon Trail. And those tourism dollars, get spent over and over again in your communities. And that I think is so critical, right, to any place as beautiful as this, to bring people to come and see it, visit it, and spend their money here. I'm real proud of the people that we're employing. And, I think it's about the whiskey, and it's about so much more. It's the connection to the community. Whiskey, one of the things that makes it so special is it's from a place. George Dipple is Tennessee whiskey, and it's a celebration of that place. So, whether you personally drink it or not, I think if you love farmers, if you like jobs, if you like tourism, if you like those things, you like your local whiskey distiller a whole lot.
I'm the candidate of jobs, not mobs, so I appreciate that. I want to have a question for you. So there's a rumor out there. So I, of course, grew up in Tennessee, but I split my professional life between here and Washington, D.C. mostly. There's a rumor out there that Chris occasionally drinks Jameson in Washington, D.C., which is an Irish whiskey. Tell me what is distinctive about George Dickel and Tennessee whiskey, and maybe what makes it better than that crooked Irish whiskey.
Well, I distilled Irish whiskey when I was in Ireland, so I would never say anything bad about it, although Tullamore Dew is my personal favorite. So it depends who you ask. If you go over to Ireland or to Scotland and you ask them about their whiskey, they'll say, that we season the casks for them and they get to take our casks and they're all done. But you ask someone from here, I would say we take the best. We take the cream off of the top of those casks and then give it to them when we're all done. So it's all a matter of your perspective. But the whiskey you just showed, so Dickel 12, that's our flagship whiskey. It's my personal favorite in the collection. It's incredibly rich and complex, and it's really, I think, one of the best examples out there of the Tennessee whiskey style.
Well, and one of the things I think is interesting to me is, do we undersell Tennessee has not realized the national and international draw of Tennessee whiskey. We kind of focus on Jack Daniels, but isn't Tennessee whiskey as a whole have a national draw that perhaps natives, locals fail to understand?
It does. I think it's not just natives and it's not just locals. I think the whole world has really been underappreciating Tennessee whiskey for a really long time. And that's part of what brought me here to try and change that. Kentucky has always been so at the forefront. Not always, actually, that's not correct, right? Just in the last 40, 50 years or so, Kentucky has really taken a lot of prominence in our minds as the kind of heart and soul of bourbon. But that's a little bit of a construct. We here in Tennessee have been making some really beautiful whiskey for just as long as they've been making it in Kentucky. And something that is actually little known is that Tennessee whiskey is bourbon. So we have all the same rules as bourbon, and then we have some kind of extra rules on top. So Tennessee whiskey is actually a regional identity of bourbon. And in order to be called Tennessee whiskey, you of course have to be making it in the state of Tennessee and using this Lincoln County process, which is a charcoal mellowing process. And I think a lot of people misunderstand that process. They think it kind of takes something away, right? That Tennessee whiskey is Kentucky bourbon minus something. And, folks from here, I think, understand that we would never do that. We have a deep love of our whiskey, and the charcoal mellowing process really serves to kind of let us make actually a bigger, bolder, more complex whiskey that's still really balanced and pleasant to drink. It's really exceptional. And getting that recognition, I think if you take one sip of it, immediately that's pretty special whiskey. And I think Tennessee whiskey in general is really just starting to kind of grow that national and international recognition as whiskey of true quality and true distinction. And that's something that was so exciting for me. That's why winning Whiskey of the Year last year meant so much to all of us at the distillery, because it really helped make the point, along with a lot of other Tennessee whiskey producers around here, including, Uncle Nearest, which is also right near me in Shelbyville, of course, Jack Daniels, and the more than 40 members of the Tennessee Whiskey Trail. We're all really excited that people are starting to see Tennessee whiskey as true whiskey of quality and distinction. And that's only going to help us kind of grow this industry.
Let's talk about growing the industry. So what do you think? And good shot there. The bottle and bond. What do you think is the most important thing that I can do? So I made the promise, and these crooked politicians, they always make promises. One of the promises I've made is be the most pro-whiskey congressman that God ever made. And of course, in my district, I'm home Jack Daniels. But we also have other distilleries at George Dickel during the year. What can I do to be the most pro-whiskey congressman that the Lord ever made?
Well, a couple things. The first thing that comes to mind, something that a lot of people don't realize about the whiskey industry, is we have to plan ahead a really long time. Whiskey that I'm distilling today, I might not put in a bottle for 7, 10, 15, 20 years. So we're always really playing the long game, trying to plan ahead. And that's one of the things that makes it so challenging for us. When we go, federally and lobby and get, 1 year extensions on our tax structure, it just creates a lot of uncertainty. It makes it really, really hard for us to plan, the kind of timescales that we need to plan to make quality whiskey. So, co-sponsoring our bill.
Well, and one of the things that I think is intriguing about this is that the whiskey industry, I imagine you've had a pretty rough 3 or 4 months. And so I want to talk about the impact. Someone's asked a question in the comments about the impact that the COVID-19 had on the whiskey trail here in Tennessee. I want to ask about the tourism aspect, but also want to ask about sales as too. What has COVID-19 done? Actually, if you want to talk about it, were you all eligible for a PPP loan? Did you all go down that route?
That's way above my pay grade. I have no idea. I hang out in the distillery. I focus on the whiskey. So I have the incredible good fortune to, I have the funnest job.
Well, and so what about though on the whiskey trails? You all were shut down for a time. Did you all just reopen? Is that right?
We did. Yeah, we did. We just reopened at the visitor center, and I think we're so grateful to be able to welcome people back. The distillery is such a special place, and there's really no substitute, for seeing it and being able to experience it there. So I'm really grateful that we're able to welcome people back to the distillery, and I think it's been a really important part of our business for every distiller in Tennessee. So I think we're all looking forward to that.
So I'm a novice. I'm just a guy who drinks Jameson, drinks Jack Daniels, and drinks George Dickel. So help me understand this. So in 2019,
but we appreciate you. I don't get anywhere without that. So
exactly, we're funding the industry. So
that's right.
You're George Dickel, everyone. Help me understand your 2019 award. You got the Spirit of the Year award. Is that right?
Whiskey of the Year. Yeah, Whiskey of the Year from Whiskey Advocate. And then we were also the best rated North American whiskey by Wine Enthusiasts. So it was a real grand slam, and I'm deeply proud.
Well, and so on this too. So is the best way to understand George Dickel is you all are a brand of repute and age and tradition, but in some ways you're trying to innovate and reinvigorate that brand by building on tradition, but also going in some new direction as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, George Dickel has a 150-year history as a brand. It was founded in 1870, which is an incredible heritage and something I'm so cognizant of, being at the helm now. It's a huge responsibility, right? Not to really honor that heritage. And that's what that first Bottled and Bond release was about. It was about paying honor and kind of showing the amazing whiskey that we've been making at Cascade Hollow for so many years. Bottled and bond, it's actually quite an antiquated piece of legislation, but it's a perfect example of why having pro-whisky congressmen can be so helpful for the industry. It's a law that was passed to try and protect quality and authenticity in whiskey. So releasing a bottled and bond, if you see that on the label, you really know exactly where that whiskey came from, and you know exactly what you're getting in that bottle. So it's, as a category, it has a deep heritage, and that's something that I really want to pay respect to. But something that's exciting, about having a distillery that's as amazing as George Dickel, having a whole bunch of operators who know so much, and having just warehouses absolutely full of beautiful whiskey, is there's a lot of other kind of exciting, creative things that you can do. So I told you before about, kind of the patience that the whiskey industry requires. So I've been in this role for 2 years, and of course have been distilling some creative and interesting things, but just because the whiskey takes a while, it's going to be a few more years possibly before you start to see some of those. But I've also been really diving into our warehouses, and that's something I have incredible privilege to be able to play around in. And we have some really beautiful whiskeys that just don't exactly fit kind of the George Dickel profile. So I'm also thinking a lot about, what fun and exciting and different and interesting things can I do with those whiskeys that are hopefully just going to have more people get excited and talk about, Tennessee whiskey, and really show our stretch, show the amazing things that we can produce that maybe surprise people and are a little bit unexpected from what they thought Tennessee whiskey was about.
And help me understand, can you talk a little bit about another question about the Tennessee Distillers Guild and how has that helped them, and what does that help in terms of legislation and advocacy, but also in terms of business relationships across the Mid-South in particular?
Well, getting organized is so important. As an industry, the rising tide raises all boats. It's something that I've been really passionate about my entire history in this industry. I was actually the founding president of the New York State Distillers Guild. So about 10 of us got together and just recognized that, we have an incredibly heavily regulated industry. And so those sort of natural things that any small business owner takes for granted, the ability to create your product and also sell it, or talk about your product or show people where you make it or share it with them. Those are all privileges that, we had to fight for. And it makes a huge difference if you come together. And I think it shows your power, right? It's so important to get together and come to the table together. So having a professional organization like the New York State Distillers Guild was for us in New York, like the Tennessee Distillers Guild is here, it just really helps us be much more effective advocates for the whole industry. I think we all recognize that, we rise and fall together, that the reputation of Tennessee whiskey is so important, and it's so much bigger than any one distillery. That if we build that reputation, nationally and internationally as whiskey of the highest quality and the boldest and the most exciting, that's going to help all of us. So I think we all really recognize that it's important to be in it together.
Well, and I think what's interesting about this is you talk about this bold and this innovation, but staying close to tradition. I watched a few of your interviews, and it seems like you don't like this question, so I'm going to go for it. There's been comments about you being a woman in the industry, and you say there's stereotypes that women have not been leaders in this industry, and everyone acts like you're such an innovator for being a woman in rural Tennessee, running a distillery. Can you talk about the complexities of that and why that's a misconstrual and what the reality is on that?
Sure. I mean, the reality is that women have been here the whole time, right? Women have been a central part of the whiskey industry since there was no industry, and it was just a natural part of running your farm. It was just something that you did to preserve your agricultural product for, forward season. If you had a bumper crop, distilling was a way of making sure that you didn't go bad. And women were a central part of that going back, all the way to the 1700s, 1800s. So we've been here the whole time, and even up through, the post-prohibition recovery period, there have been women in this industry. Sherry Moore at Jack Daniels was running that plant for years, before I ever even had a thought in my mind of what whiskey was. And it's just that those women didn't they weren't always front and center. Those weren't necessarily the women that got put on the bottle or put in the commercials or, talked about. It was more about how whiskey got talked about. But we've been here the whole time. And your district in particular actually is pretty strong in impressive ladies in the industry. Fawn Weaver and Uncle Nearest and Sherry Moore, who actually came out of retirement from Jack to work at Uncle Nearest, is pretty impressive distiller. Alyssa Henley, who used to work at George Dickel, is working on opening a distillery in Murfreesboro. So you've got some pretty badass ladies here.
Well, let's talk too a little bit about Fawn Weaver. So I don't know if folks know the story of Fawn Weaver. Can you talk about, so Fawn is down also in Shelbyville as well. Can you talk a little bit about what she did to challenge Jack Daniels when Jack Daniels really failed to honor history and slavery being a part of its story as well?
Well, I can never speak for her, but I can tell you she probably wouldn't characterize it that way. I think, she would say that she just had an incredible passion for his story. Nearest Green was an amazing person, an incredible character, and she wanted to celebrate that, tell the world about it. And I think if you look it up, you can see how powerful a story it's been and how relevant it's been for people. The distillery that she's building is right down the road for me, and I'm so glad to have her as a neighbor. It's a pretty amazing place. And we share a passion for whiskey.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think one of the things too that is intriguing, we know that business owners in rural Tennessee, about 44% of business owners in rural Tennessee are women. Now that number is actually surprisingly high for rural America. Rural Tennessee has a particular poignancy for producing women leaders in the workplace and small businesses and business community. Can you talk a little bit about what we can do to help women in entrepreneurship, women in leadership, women in business in rural Tennessee?
Yeah. Well, I can certainly tell you what I'm doing. So Fawn actually got together and came to a whole bunch of us in the industry to talk about the need to create a more robust pipeline for minorities and for women to get into this industry. It's a growing industry. There's incredible demand for people to work in this industry. And I think just a lot of folks have had a hard time breaking in. So she came to me with this idea of creating a leadership acceleration program. And I thought it was an amazing idea. I certainly got a lot of help and a real hand up when I was joining the industry 10 years ago. So when she came to me to ask for my help and support, I of course agreed to join her, along with some folks from Jack Daniels and some other leaders in the craft spirits industry, including Becky Harris, who is now the president of the American Craft Spirits Association, which is another organization that's near and dear to my heart. And we all got together and agreed to donate our skills and our time to formally mentor people that want to get into this industry, and particularly a focus on minorities. And actually the first person who's going to go through this mentorship program is an incredibly talented Black woman and who's going to become a master distiller. And so I am spending a lot of my time and effort to try and help people who want to get into this industry to help them. And I think, that's one of the first and best things that we can do. It's certainly something I can do in my corner, is just help raise people up and share my knowledge and really pay it forward. And a lot of other things that I do to help people get into this industry, I think one of the biggest things that's so important is, I think part of it's just being out there, showing people that it's possible, for people who look like you to join this industry, just to give, people the idea that this is a job that you can do, is something that was huge for me, when it was first pointed out. I didn't come to it right away out of college because it didn't even really occur to me that it was a job that you could do. And so just being out there, I think, and talking to people about it and talking about the value of this industry, that it's maybe not exactly what they thought, and starting to break down some of the stereotypes that maybe hold people back from kind of going after this opportunity. I think in whiskey in particular, it's really important. But, functionally, what's critical is things like access to capital, things like predictable tax structures that allow you to make forward plans. There's some also really practical logistical things that are really helpful if you want to get into this industry.
Well, one of the things too, I think that is remarkable about your story And I think something that I fear as a Tennessean is it seems like you get more national attention than local attention. It seems that the national media is more obsessed with you than perhaps the local media. And I wonder sometimes if we do not know what we have in our midst. I have a question in the comments. What is the painting behind you?
Oh, actually, it's a painting of the distillery. So it's a beautiful place if you've never been able to visit, but it's a painting of the distillery at night. It's actually a friend of mine in New York did the painting, and I thought it was really beautiful. So that's Cascade Distillery, where we make George Dickel.
And Greg, I think has what I think will be the final question. What is in the works? What can you tell us about what's coming next from George Dickel? Can you tell us company trade secrets?
I can't tell you trade secrets, but I can certainly drop some hints. We have an amazing single barrel program, which lets people and retailers and bars and even private citizens, if they want to come to our visitor center, buy an entire barrel of whiskey. And the thing that's really special about that is every barrel is different, right? All the ingredients of whiskey come out of the ground and not out of a lab. And that barrel itself, every single one of them is unique. Every single one of those barrels is a little bit different. So to buy one barrel, you're getting to taste whiskey that will never exist again, right? It really only exists in that moment. So it's quite special. And you heard me earlier talk a lot about the incredible, very old, very amazing whiskey that I have in my warehouses. So maybe you can take some guesses. We also have some really interesting and different whiskeys, like I was saying earlier, that don't quite fit George Dickel, character or style, but are really exceptional and lovely. And so I'll be playing around a bit with those. I think you'll see a lot more on that kind of amazing, special, old, mature whiskey. After that, some of the things I've been distilling since I got here in 2018 might start to come of age, and keep a lookout for those.
Well, you're getting us excited. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being a Tennessean, and thank you for what you're doing in the whiskey industry, and we need you.
I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to be welcome here.
Yes, well, thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
That is Nicole Austin, and I kind of briefly highlighted something. Let me make it a little bit more explicit. So Nicole was in the Tullahoma Times in 2019, fine newspaper, don't get me wrong. She didn't even make it to the front page above the fold. She made it below the fold. New York Times put her on the front page of Sunday edition. She was in the Atlantic. She's been in Playboy, GQ, etc. So sometimes I wonder, sometimes I fear here in Tennessee, if we do not realize what we have in our community. We do not realize that we have Nicole Austin and Fawn Weaver and folks like that who are being leaders in the whiskey industry. And we can't lose these folks. They're not natives here. They chose to be Tennesseans, but we need to do our best as communities, as governments, as localities, so lifting up particularly these women in business. And that's what I want to do in the United States Congress. Folks, elections in 4 days, early voting is in 4 days. I am the candidate that is going to beat Congressman Dave Jarley on the 3rd of November. I'm the candidate who has gone around this state, not just in the past few days and weeks and months, but over the past few years. And I am the candidate that has the resources, the energy, the drive, the momentum, the people to win this election. Our candidacy has been featured on Fox, on MSNBC, in the Washington Post. The entire nation is looking to this race. Citizens from every state in this country have given to this campaign. All 50 states have donated to my campaign for the United States Congress, and in every county in our congressional district, over 3,000 folks have given to this campaign. Will you give tonight? Will you invest in this movement to bring generational change to Tennessee and America? The average contribution to our campaign is a mere $27.11. Scott Desjardins, the average contribution his last quarter was $1,600. He is funded by rich folks out of state who do not care about you and your family. I'm funded by working class people like you who want a fighting chance to make life better for themselves and their posterity. And I'm humbly asking for your support. You can go to ChristopherHale.com. If you can give $5, give 5. If you can give more, give more. We have some folks who, out of the abundance of generosity, give a lot more. It can be $2,800 or $2. Whatever you can give, we need it. It's not going to feed me. It's going to feed this movement to bring generational change, to make a lasting impact in Washington. Congressman Desjardins has been in office a decade. He's made $1.7 billion in a decade. The only piece of legislation he's ever passed is renaming a post office. Hell, I'll give you a post office on day one. I can get you a post office within the first 24 hours in my tenure in the United States Congress, but I can give you so much more. I'm fighting to bring rural jobs, rural healthcare, hospitals, and living wages to all parts of this community. I'm a fighter. I'm a fighter because I believe in what I'm doing. I'm a fighter because I know how to make government work for you and your family, and I need your vote. I want you to vote. If you can vote in person, do it. If you need a mail-in ballot, you can do so as well. Those details are on my website. But I need your support in this campaign. I'm humbly asking for your support. And if you're with me, get a sign. We have over 400 signs in the ground across the state. We're hoping to have 10,000 up by November 3rd. These are the best signs in the history of Tennessee politics. Bill Boner has nothing on us. What these signs represent is a sign of fed up, I've had enough, a sign of resistance in a way, but also a sign of hope and new things to come. Put a sign in your yard. Let your neighbors know they're not alone, they're not alone in supporting a young man who's trying to make things better for Tennessee, who's going to bring the fight to Congressman Desjardins. He's going to be a champion of the Davids against the Goliaths of this world. Get a sign. And finally, go volunteer. Even if you have an hour from your couch, we can put you to work. My campaign has over 215 volunteers who've made over 40,000 contacts with Tennessee voters. That is the most of any candidacy, any campaign in this entire state for any office, Senate, United States Senate, congressional, and down. We are the movement of the people. We are a grassroots campaign who is fueled by everyday Tennesseans like you. And finally, I want you to send a message to your neighbors, to your friends, to those across the state. To everyone who is struggling tonight, whether from this deadly virus, the inability to find good work, a sketched past, or a dim future, I want you to know this. I'm going to walk with you the entire way forward. Help is on the way. May God bless you, and may God protect our troops.